Amnon, shalom.
Hi, Tom.
Great to be with you. I guess we can take our masks off since we're 5 feet and 5,000 miles apart.
Yeah, 6,000 miles away. I think the audience are not aware of that. I'm in Tel Aviv, you are the East Coast, and they should see us in the same room. So, Tom, we have been having running conversations for the past couple of years, talking about technology, talking about revolutions, talking about your fascinating book, Fast, Fused, and Deep, talking about how AI figures into it, what happens after AI, autonomous driving. So we thought that it would be nice that we start sharing all those conversations that we had with the public. And I'm so happy that we have the chance to do it, even though that we are 6,000 miles away from each other.
Me too, Amnon. I've been really looking forward to this.
So let's go right into it. Speaking about technology, society has been experiencing leaps, technological leaps for decades, from the Industrial Revolution, landing on the moon, computer age, social networks, internet. So what's so special about our times today? You have a very, very crisp kind of notion of the fast, fused, and deep.
Well, let me take a few minutes, Amnon, to share that framework. I basically look at advances in technology through what I call Promethean moments. Prometheus was the Greek god who basically stole fire from Mount Olympus and gave it to humans to develop civilization. If you think of three great Promethean leaps forward, the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, and I think the one we're going through right now. And this Promethean moment is not about a single invention, not a printing press or a combustion engine. It's actually three simultaneous accelerations in what I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, i.e. technology, globalization, and climate change. All three are accelerating in a nonlinear fashion. And what those three accelerations are doing is making the world, what I would argue, fast, fused, and deep, to a difference of degree that's a difference in kind. And it's really what's forcing us to change everything, including how we govern ourselves. So if you think of the Industrial Revolution, how did we manage? That was a very destabilizing moment when capitalism met the Industrial Revolution. And it took us over a century to figure out how do we govern that. And what we governed it through was something we called the welfare state. And the welfare state had sort of three broad components. It had walls against transfer of trade and human beings. It had floors to cushion people, and it had a ceiling. A ceiling was on the pace of change, basically. It was implied. And politics, left-right politics, was really a debate about how high the walls should be. People on the left said, let's have high walls. People on the right said low walls. How thick the floor should be. People on the left said, let's have thick floors cushioning people. People on the right said thin floors. And the ceiling on change was kind of basically implied. It was limited by the Industrial Revolution. What I would argue, Amnon, because of advances in software, chips, and lately AI, which you're going to talk about, we've actually blown away the walls. We've crashed through the floor, and we've blown off the ceiling as the world's become fast, fused, and deep. So let's go through all of those very quickly. So fast means basically what happens when the world gets this fast is that the half-life of skills just gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And that has a real education implication. So, you probably read about in America, we had these people in Hollywood who went out and hired some guy to get their kids into universities in USC and Yale and whatnot. I wanted to call those parents up and say, excuse me, but if you're actually going to bribe someone to get them into a university, could I suggest you bribe to get them into Infosys's in-house university, Infosys, the Indian technology company? Because I'm known, if I showed you Infosys's in-house university, it would blow your mind. We say, what's that about? Well, in the old world, in the industrial world, I government educated, you business employed. But when the half-life of skills gets this short and the pace of change in every job changes this quickly, suddenly I as business, I have to be educator and employer at the same time. I have to offer not just in-case learning, but what Infosys calls just-in-time learning. And I think basically now education is going to move to a kind of ecosystem between businesses educating and employing and governments educating and partnering with business for education. So you see, we have to be in kind of multiple states at the same time now. As business, I got to be educator and employer when the skills are changing that fast. And my employees need just-in-time learning, not just-in-case learning. Then when the world gets this fused, through technology, through climate change, you get the same phenomena. I was recently talking to Don Rosenberg, the chief legal officer for Qualcomm. Don was explaining to me, Qualcomm's relationship with Huawei, the big Chinese technology, telecommunications, and 5G giant. He said Qualcomm's relationship with Huawei for us is our customer, our partner, our competitor, our supplier, and our shared global standard setter. They have 5 different relationships with Huawei in a fused world. Now, what about deep? Deep, you may have noticed, in the last 2 years, 3 years, we suddenly started adding the adjective deep to everything. Deep state, deep fake, deep mind, deep medicine, deep research. There's no global lexicographer who ordered this. We just did it intuitively. And it even started to show up in popular culture. The song that won the Oscars a couple of years ago by Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga was called Shallow. But what was the main verse? I'm off the deep end, watch as I drive in. I'll never meet the ground, crash through the surface where they can't hurt us. We're far from the shallow now. Oh, Amnon, we are far from the shallow now. Technology is going deep inside us, deep inside our systems, our businesses, our bodies, toggling our DNA at a speed and depth and precision we've never seen before. And again, how does that show up in governing? Well, I learned the best lesson about this from a guy named Amnon Shashua. Because in the old world, I-government regulated, you, Mobileye, and Intel innovated. But what happens if Mobileye and Intel are innovating so deep, I don't even know who you are? So I want to tell our audience a little story. I was in Israel last year before the pandemic, and I was at a dinner with Amnon, and he said to me, Tom, have you ever ridden in a self-driving car? And I said, I was just out in Mountain View riding in a self-driving car out there. He said, Mountain View. That's a grid. Try driving in a self-driving car in Jerusalem where there are no 2 parallel streets. So I couldn't resist. I went up to Jerusalem. I met with Amnon. We rode in Mobileye's self-driving car around Jerusalem. Hills, hairpin turns, donkeys, camels, Jews, Arabs, rabbis. And this car is just driving me all through the streets of Jerusalem all by itself. We get done, and Amnon tells me an interesting story. When the world gets this deep and you want to develop a self-driving car, you need to test and iterate and design all in the same place. And to do that, you actually need an insurance protocol that defines what is safe self-driving. Otherwise, anything you hit and anything that hit you, you'd get sued. So that was a problem for Mobileye because the rabbis running Jerusalem don't know a lot about self-driving cars. So what did Amnon and Mobileye do? They actually convened an ecosystem of Volkswagen, their car supplier, Mobileye, the rabbis who run Jerusalem, and the Israeli Ministry of Transportation. And together as an ecosystem, they developed a protocol, an insurance protocol for safe self-driving. It was so good that Yandex, Russia's Google, now tests their self-driving car in Israel. And China just took the whole Mobileye protocol, translated into Chinese, and made it their safe self-driving formula. So what you see in all these cases, Amnon, and the reason politics is kind of blowing up all over the world, is those old left-right frameworks don't work anymore. You really need ecosystems solutions because we all need to be in kind of multiple states at the same time. Just to conclude, Amnon, it's a bit like the transition we're going through between classical computing and quantum computing. So classical computing is like flipping a quarter. If you 0, 1, 0, 1, heads or tails, 0, 1. If you could flip a quarter 1 billion times on a transistor, you got compute and storage. Quantum computing is more like spinning a quarter. You can be in multiple states at the same time. And I would argue that the world we're going into, you need actually to be in multiple states at the same time. Innovator and educator, innovator and regulator. And that calls for ecosystems, what I call complex adaptive coalitions. That's what Mobileye built in Israel to govern safe self-driving. But to have a complex adaptive coalition, you need to have shared values. And so my question to you, Amnon, is how do you get shared values in this world? Because we not only need shared values between men and men, women and women, but we need shared values between men and machines, women and machines in a fast, fused, and deep world.
Fascinating, Tom. So now let's make it more complicated and add a technological spin to it. When you think about computers are driven by compute. And due to Moore's law, the abundance of data, the rise of machine learning and AI, compute has transformed to something much more than a tool. Now, it affects our life deeply. And when something affects your life deeply, you need to ask about, what are the values of this thing? Because it's affecting me on a daily basis. So let me give you two examples. In the first example, now let's assume that we have an agent deployed in the real world, and this agent is interacting in the real world. And we need to kind of convince ourselves that while this agent is interacting in the real world and improving itself, now let's assume it has a reward function and wants to optimize that reward function through interaction with humans. So it's improving itself. So a computer agent is interacting in the real world. And we need to convince ourselves that this agent will converge onto a state in which it's aligned with human interests. Does this agent understand human interests? Does this agent understand human values? Because it's improving itself. So let me be more concrete. So let's assume that we're building a chatbot. Companies are working on it, academias are working on it. So I'm not talking about something really futuristic, that already exist. So let's assume, take the existing chatbots, but slightly better. Okay, and now deploy them into the real world. And now let's put a reward function that we want to optimize. Let's assume that the reward function would be something altruistic, not make me more money, make me happy, make society happy. So while you're interacting with society, with people, improve yourself to make the people that you're interacting with more happy. Can't be better than that, But now, we're talking about a very sophisticated, software agent powered by AI. And this software agent at some point will figure out or can figure out that if you lower people's IQ, they tend to have less worries and maybe become more happy. Right?
Now I know what I need.
Now, this is something that we completely did not anticipate as engineers when we programmed this AI. And it's not something that will be evident quickly. It could take decades, until, people's IQ get lowered, because this software agent, will convince me to, why work so hard, drink beer, go have fun,
Don't read.
Don't need to kind of excel and so forth and so forth. And, over time, people will get dumber and dumber and dumber. And, it could take decades until we understood that this AI, which had very, very good intentions, look what a catastrophe it generated. So this idea of understanding what the AI will do is very, very important, because this AI, its values are important. Let me give you another example. Another example would be autonomous driving. So if we have self-driving cars, the promise is that we will save millions of lives, because robotic drivers are not distracted. They're very predictable, they're not distracted, there are no reason that they'll cause accidents. But once you deploy such a robotic agent amongst human drivers, then accidents will happen. And then you ask yourself, how do I guarantee, or how do I convince myself as a society that these machines are making decisions that align with human judgment? Because when we drive, we have judgments. We are making assumptions, we have judgments. So there are traffic laws. With traffic laws, there isn't much judgment. If there's a red light, I need to stop. But there is a duty to be careful. Now, for example, a right of way is given but not taken. Right? Even though I have the right of way, I should not force it, because if the other guy is not giving me, is not granting me my right of way, I should yield, right? So because there is this directive of be careful. Now, how do you go and translate be careful into code, into a mathematical formalism? Because you want society to understand what this machine is doing, that its judgment is aligned with the way humans judge a situation. For example, if I want to change lane and the next lane is congested, I'm trying to push my way. And I want the other guy in the next lane to slow down so that I can push my way in. So humans make assumptions and have certain ways of doing judgments. And when those judgments break, we'll say that the human had a lapse of judgment or was reckless. All right? So we don't want machines to be reckless, but we need to define to them what is this borderline between careful and recklessness. So everything needs to be defined mathematically. So this is a way in which we want to code value, because we want to have shared value between the machine, in this case it's a robotic agent, and humans, because other humans are also occupying the road. They are also road users. So this is something that we at Intel and Mobileye took up upon ourselves 3 years ago, and we published an academic paper called Responsibility Sensitive Safety, or RSS. And this ties to what you mentioned before. We came to the conclusion that if we wait until regulators will come and figure out how to regulate the self-driving technology, we'll wait forever. We need to be proactive. We need to come with a model and then go to regulators and tell them, look, this is the model. This is how we define careful driving. Let's have a conversation. Give me feedback. You think that we defined it wrongly? So, here are parameters. Let's have a conversation on the parameters. Let's do a coalition with other industrial actors. For example, in the US, there's this IEEE program, P2846, which is chaired by Intel, but has all the actors in self-driving industry to start working on this kind of model. How do you go and regulate what it means to be careful driving? We're working with regulatory bodies. You mentioned China. So China already adopted it. We're working in Israel, in the UK, in France. The idea here is to work together with regulators as an ecosystem, exactly what you mentioned before. And until we spoke about it, I didn't even realize that we're building an ecosystem. Yeah. It was so natural for us to say, no, we can't wait for the regulatory bodies to do it. So shared values between humans and machines become critical